and we are recording. And so this presentation will be available at some time in the future in some format. Anthony, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Mark. Hopefully we'll have a chance to not only answer your questions, but maybe do a few live on-air demos with FT8 and FT4 this morning. So this presentation is a shorter version of my extensive presentation, which I'll share the links to also, so you can click on the resources in the presentation. This is a picture of me doing a field day in Vermont last summer, and I'm operating FT8 on the left-hand computer on my left side here, and my main computer I'm doing the single sideband and CW operation. So I'm guessing that most of you have reading this have either heard about FT8 from fellow hams or heard it on the air, and I'm just going to play two tones here so you hear what it sounds like. Warning for those of you that have pets. That's FT8, and here's FT4. So you notice that they have a little bit different sounds to them. And FT8 is one of the fastest growing modes of amateur radio. It's only been around for 3 years, but it's really exploded. But first of all, who's responsible for this program? WSJT-X software, which is what FT8 and FT4 are part of, and its component modes originally developed by the Nobel laureate Joe Taylor, K8ZT. Other prominent developers in the project include Steve Frank, hence the term FT for Frank Taylor in FT8 and FT4, and Bill Somerville, who's very active on the web reflector answering many questions. Whenever you see a link in the presentation, it'll have a little icon. That means when you go back and view the slides separately, you can click on those links for further resources. So first, a couple of FT8, FT4 myths. Some people think that FT8 requires that you have an internet connection to make QSOs. That's not the case. You're going to see some cases where I'm pulling information from the internet to get things such as operator's name and location, but that's simply an ancillary program that works with FT8 and FT4. Some people don't think you need to have an operator present. Well, you do. And other people don't think you need to have a skilled operator present. Other myth is that there's no home brewing or kits available for digital communication. We'll talk about 2 kits that really fill that bill very inexpensively. And some people think you have to have a new radio to be able to use FT8 or FT4. That's not at all the case. And one of the things that's a myth is that you can't call CQ with QRP. I definitely can call CQ with FT8 or FT4 much more than I can with either CW or single sideband when I'm using QRP, and expect not only answers but often pileups. So why do I do FT8 and FT4? Well, it's my multitasking mode. I actually started with JT65 where I had a full minute between transmissions and I could jump up and get a cup of coffee. With FT8 and FT4 though, they're always on the background. Matter of fact, it's on right now. I could be making a contact and you don't even realize it. It also works great with my QRP signal. Some other reasons, it's been able to increase my total DXCC, worked all states, and total QSO numbers, especially on the less used bands of 6 meters, 12 meters, 17, 30. And you see on 60 meters, 98% of my contacts are actually with digital modes as opposed to CW or single sideband. It also allows me bands that often seem dead. I typically use 10 and 12 meters during the week, and I've been doing them during the sunspot minimums here without much trouble. I can call CQ and get pileups. I'm very interested in operating 160, but I have a limited size lot here, very small garden in the back of my property. So I have to squeeze in a sloper that comes off my tower, and it's only 60 foot, which is quite short for 160. But you'll notice that I've been able to work over 60 new countries on digital modes and push my totals over 75 for the band, including my longest QSOs on 160 are 1,300 miles to South Africa, Siberia, and then a surprise one day, I thought I was working in ES1, but it turned out when I looked closer at the screen, I was actually working in E51 on 160 to North Cook Island. On the other end of the frequency scale, at the top end of the frequencies, FT8 and FT4 are great for sporadic E. And I wrote an article for a local newsletter, and you can read it later, on working 6 meter, 10 meter, and 12 meter E-skip using sporadic E. Because the band FT8 has only been around for 3 years, I can only tell you information for 3 years worth of totals, and FT4 has only been around for 1 year. But in that time period, using all QRP and at the sunspot minimum, I've worked 214 DXCC entities. I had to change the slide yesterday because I worked the 4UN1 this week and bumped my total up by 1. I've got DXCC on 3 bands, 8 bands worked all states, and over 15,000 QSOs. All of them have been less than 5 watts. On worked all states, I've already completed worked all states on CW and sideband and most of the bands. But one of my goals was with FT8 to try and work all 11 bands, 160 through 6. I'm now 5 QSOs short of completing a 5-band worked all state QRP with FT8. So anyone out there in Hawaii, I need a couple bands today. As far as DXCC goes, these are the countries I've worked, and I don't have the 4U on here because I finished the slide before that. CQ zones, these are the CQ zones, and I have the same problems on FT8 that I do with the other modes. In the zones 22, 23, 26 are very difficult from the US with QRP. One of the interesting things with FT8 is you can use antennas that aren't that great. So if you're limited, if you have a housing restriction that limits what kind of outdoor antenna you can have, you're forced to have an indoor antenna or something as a compromise, these modes with their high signal to noise ratio capability can work with subpar antennas. One antenna that a lot of people use as a portable antenna for limited space antenna is a magnetic loop. And the problem when you're using a magnetic loop is every time you adjust your VFO, you have to tweak the loop because it has a very narrow bandwidth. But with FT8 and FT4, once you choose a band, you pretty much stay on the same frequency, so you're not retuning it all the time. So it's a great combination of using a magnetic loop along with FT8 and FT4. My modes of operation have changed a little bit since 1983 when I first got on HF, and I was strictly CW at that time. Over the years, you can see that I've had a mix of CW, RTTY, and single sideband. I like to operate all modes with QRP. I'm not just a single mode operator. But you notice in the last couple of years, these different colors sneaking in. So if you look at my statistics from 1981 to 2015, you'll see that I was working about 60% CW, about 36% phone, and a little bit of RTTY. From 2016 to 2020, that's drastically changed because I'm now working quite a bit of FT8, some FT4, and actually my single sideband has went down a little bit, and my CW has went down partially. And if you look at my totals from 1983 to 2020, you'll see the changes. The 3 graphs down at the bottom show the progression over the last 5 years. JT65 I started in 2016, and by midway through 2017, FT8 came out, and as soon as it came out, my JT65 activity dropped down considerably, and by the next year it was gone completely. And you'll notice that I was operating almost 50% FT8 at that point in time. Then in 2019, FT4 came out, and I started using it considerably, and it dropped my FT8 activities somewhat. But you notice my CW stayed about the same in both these cases. Many modes, including JT65, FT8, and FT4, are included in the WSJT-X software suite. It can decode signals decibels below the noise floor. You can even have a successful exchange of information with signals that are inaudible to the human ear. One of the things that it does is it adds redundancy to the data that's being transmitted so that a message may be successfully recovered even if some bits are not received by the receiver. One of the ways it does this by using special computer algorithms and by using time synchronization so that the stations are all on the same time. So your time does need to remain synchronized on your computer within less than 1 second, and that's something you can do in a number of different ways. So FT8 came out in June 29th of 2017, and there's about 15 seconds in each cycle. So you transmit for 12 and a half seconds. There's some computer processing goes on for about 2.5 seconds, and then the next station starts transmitting. FT4, when it came out, is not quite as sensitive, but it takes only half as long. So you can do a QSO in twice as many QSOs in the same amount of time. Here's some numbers. If you notice, single sideband requires about a 10 dB difference between signal and noise ratio. A great CW operator can get down maybe to 15 dB. Not everyone can. But you'll notice with FT8 and FT4, we're even much lower. This is just a screenshot of the WSJT-X software, and I'll be going into detail in each of these different areas in a few minutes. So what can WSJT-X do? It can automatically log your contacts into an ADIF file, so you're not transcribing them or having to write out a paper log. It easily transfers this log to Logbook of the World, EQSL, so you'll find out that you'll get a higher percentage of Logbook of the World and EQSL confirmations with this than you will with the other modes. It lets you know how strong your signals are by decoding the signals in dBs, so you'll get a little more indicative value for the strength of your signal than just the 5.9 or an arbitrary report that you might get. It works with almost any single sideband radio, including those that operate in VHF and UHF. So what can WSJT-X not do? Well, it's not a mode for rag truing. You're limited to 14 characters per transmission, so it's not conducive to long chatting. JS8 call is a variation that people have made because it's open source software. They've modified the source code from WSJT-X to allow it to be more of a full messaging mode, but it's not quite as efficient or effective as WSJT-X and FT8, but it is an option. PSK31 is a more traditional option for keyboard-to-keyboard communication digitally in longer format. You can't work it without a computing device. Even though you might be able to think you can decode RTTY in your head when you hear it, I do think I can understand my call sign when I hear it, but you can't do the same thing with WSJT-X. So you need a computer, and there is no radio that has built-in FT8 capability because of that. You need a radio. You cannot use a radio that's CW only because it needs to send different tones. You cannot work a station without an operator, and it can't make a nice cup of tea for you. It makes a really subpar American-style tea, using tea bags in cold water, which any of you that have visited Dayton have the unfortunate occasion to partake of. It can't make contacts for you when there's not a person at the other end of the station. So one evening in March of last year, I was using some reporting software called PSK Reporter, which takes signal reports from stations all around the world and puts them up on a web page so you can see who's hearing you. And I could see that a station DP0 GVN was hearing me down in Antarctica with my 5 watts on 160. And I watched it for over 20 minutes as his station continued to be able to receive me. Unfortunately, there seemed to be no one at the station to reply to my call, so I didn't work Antarctica that time. But I knew that the radio was hearing me at least. So let's now talk a little bit about getting started with WSJT-X. What do you need and how do you set it up? So you need an HF radio capable of single sideband transceive. You need a computer, and it works on Windows, Linux, OS X, and because it's based on Linux, it'll also work on Raspberry Pis. You need a sound card or sound card interface, and you need some software, but all the software is free. And some of the radios, modern radios, have the interface built in, so you don't need a separate sound card interface for those. So I put together a little chart here. These are all radios that are under $2,000 retail new, and many of them are available a lot less than that when they're on sale, some of them for as little as $700. But all the radios in the left-hand column have a built-in sound card, so all you need to do is connect the USB cable between the radio and your computer, and you can have WSJT-X up and running very quickly. The radios in the middle column do not have built-in sound card interfaces, so you would need a separate sound card interface to operate them. And the radios in the yellow on the far right do not have a sound card built into them, but they're designed so you can connect them directly to a sound card without a separate interface just by using audio cables. So those can all work very easily. And you notice down the bottom corner here, we have two kits. One $55 kit, it's a single band kit from Midnight Solutions called the Phaser, and I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. And another one from the QRP guys, which is a double single sideband digital kit. So these are available for those that like to build kits. And here's a picture of them. Here's the phaser. I'm currently building a 20-meter phaser right now. I just need to put a few more resistors in, it'll be ready to go. And here's one of the QRP double single sidebands with pluggable modules, so you can change bands by plugging in a module to switch. One afternoon, I was playing around, and I love my Argonauts. I've always been in love with the Argonaut series, and I've had a number of them around the house, and I still do. And I had a 509 here, and I said, I wonder how that would work on FT8 or FT4. So I quickly hooked up a sound card interface, the MFJ in this case, to it, and tuned the radio manually. And you can even see it has a little bit of dial sag in it, so it's leaning to the one side here. And by using this, I was able to quickly make about a dozen FT4 contacts in about 10 minutes. So you can use old radios as long as they can do single sideband. By the way, if you're interested in Argonauts, I have a whole presentation on called the Odyssey of the Argonauts and the Continued Odyssey of the Argonauts, talking about my digital adventures with the Tentex. Excuse me one second. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is download some software. WSJT-X can be downloaded from its website. And there's also some helper software that you may want. You don't absolutely need it, but it's very helpful. JT Alert for Windows or Alarm JT for Linux are pretty much the same, very similar programs that allow you to do DX spotting. And then software to maintain a highly synchronized time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You need a method to generate audio, either a sound card in the radio or a separate independent interface or a sound card in your computer. You need a way to key the radio's push to talk, and you can do one of 4 different ways. You can do CAC control, which is very easy with the radio that's being controlled for other computer control purposes. A sound card interface with built-in keying, such as the MFJ unit I showed you there, or the signal link, or you can use the radio's Vox if it has Vox, or if you really want to go old school, you can manually switch the push the talk between the whenever it keys. So the first thing I suggest is setting up the radio. You need to install the manufacturer's driver software on your computer. Please do this before you connect the radio. Set the baud rate for your radio. You may need to turn on the interface in the radio. Connect the interface facing cables to the computer. Determine the COM port of the computer. And I'm going to be talking Windows specific here on some of these items, but it's very similar for the other operating systems. Test the operation of the CAT to make sure it's working. And then you need to tweak the other settings on the radio for WSJT-X and digital modes. And I have a number of different sites where people talk about individual models of radio so that you can get some help in setting up those individual models of radio to work in your shack. Here's some of the interfaces you can use. If there's a built-in sound card interface in the radio, you don't need anything else, so you're done. That's the first option. The second option is interfacing with a built-in sound card. Interfaces with a built-in sound card such as the Signal Link, the MFJ, the Mini Pro SC from the UK. These are all in the $100 price range for interfaces. There's also some much more expensive interfaces that work. You can also get an interface without a sound card and then use your own sound card. This is a more inexpensive way to go, and there's kits available for this also. You can also use a radio without a sound card but capable of direct connection, those ones that were in the right side of that chart I showed you earlier. If your interface doesn't have a sound card, you need to provide your own sound card, and something inexpensive like this little external plug-in USB sound card will work just fine. So under $12, you can get a decent sound card that will work just fine. And then, as I said earlier, you need a way to key your radio. So you need to set that up. Then you need to set up the audio path, and this is where you just connect the cables and you configure your computer to be able to use the proper sound cards. It's very important that you do not designate the sound device that you're going to be using as your default sound device in Windows, or when you play your local YouTube that you want to watch, it'll be going out across your radio. So it'll cause all sorts of problems. So just make sure that you designate an alternative sound card, not the one you use for WSJT-X as your default. You want to set your computer's internal sound card as the default, again, not the one that you're using. Install the software, the WSJT-X. You also want time synchronization software. Windows time sync is not sufficient. The Mitenberg NTP or the Dimension 4 are two real popular ones. There's other software out there. I've already noticed the question that I always get every time is, what do I do if I'm somewhere where I don't have an internet access and I need to sync my clock? Well, your computer will stay synced for a couple days on a typical laptop without anything else. But when I'm operating in the field, I like to bring a little GPS unit that plugs into my USB port on my computer and allows me to sync my time using directly from the GPS satellites. So that's a very inexpensive way to do it and a very good way to keep your computer in synchronization even when you're in the field. So after you get all the software installed, you need to configure it. And here's the link to my full presentation where you can click on all the slides. It's tiny.cc/FT8 FT4. And I'll put this up again a few times throughout the slideshow, but if you want to jot that down real quick. And there I have pictures of all the screen settings for WSJT-X to walk you through step by step. One of the most important things to remember is after you get everything installed, do not start the software before you A, turn your radio on, and B, before you have all the USB cables connected. If you start WSJT-X without the cables connected or without the radio being turned on, it will immediately figure out that it can't find your radio, and it'll just say, do you want to reconfigure everything? Or even worse, sometimes it just reconfigures it for you on your own, and you end up with a random sound card that is obviously not the one you want, maybe the wrong radio or wrong baud rate. So always make sure all the cables are connected first, make sure the radio is turned on, then start the WSJT-X software. Operating tips. Well, I don't need to tell you to reduce the power output setting because you're all a bunch of QRPers, but I need to keep reminding my QRO friends that a 100-watt radio doesn't necessarily work at 100 watts when you're running it in a continuous mode like FT8. It can greatly overheat. And you even have to be careful with some QRP radios that you don't push it too much to overheat them. Make sure all speech processing, noise blanking, digital sound processing, everything is turned off. You don't need any of those, and they can be a problem. Some operating tips. You can create multiple WSJT-X configurations if you have more than one radio. You can also set up a second user. So if you have a spouse, for example, that uses your radio also, you can set it up so that you have two separate logs, two separate profiles, so everything is completely separate. And I have information on how to do that. You can also copy your configuration once you have it ready to put on another computer. So let's say you're using your desktop computer at the shack, but you want to go out and operate in the field and you want to move everything over to a laptop. By copying just 3 simple files into the newly installed WSJT-X software, you can clone your configuration. Now this slide is very busy, but this is a slide that when you get to the printed out version of the slideshow, you may want to print a copy and keep it in the shack. I did this for a friend of mine. I helped set him up for WSJT-X, and I think he's had every one of these problems. So I've created this sheet so I can keep it in the shack. So if things stop working, A, check the computer sound card settings, especially after Windows updates, which might change what is the default sound card being used on your system. Check your time synchronization. If it's off more than half a second, you won't be able to work people reliably. Your radio bandwidth filter needs to be set at its maximum. And that's kind of counter what we do for most cases. Usually when we want to narrow in on one signal. In this case, we want to hear all the possible signals, so keep it as wide as possible. Is your radio in its correct mode? Is WSJT-X in the correct mode? I had a friend say, hey, my radio is not working at all, and he had switched into JT6 mode or JT9 mode. He wasn't even in one of the FT8 modes in WSJT-X. And we'll talk about these other things a little bit later here. And one final check that you can always do is the radio working on other modes. If it's not working on other modes, I had a friend recently, we couldn't make a contact 5 miles away. Well, it turns out he had a broken antenna lead coming into the house, so he was not connected to his antenna. And that affects all modes, not just WSJT-X. So let's take a look at the basic operation of the software. And here's a little diagram. At the top we have some menus, and if your menus magically disappear, you don't see them, that means you've accidentally unchecked this little box down at the right here that says menus. If you do that, the menus in the top disappear. The box on the left are the stations being received. Now these are not the stations you're in QSO with, these are the stations you're decoding. And you'll see that they look a little differently. Here we have a case of CQ being called by MI7RPG. We see his CQ, his call sign, his grid square, and the software is smart enough to figure out what country he's in. In this case here in white, we have OH2, where we're not decoding the OH2, we're actually decoding the SP3 AP, who's sending Roger Roger 73 to the OH2 station. So we may never hear this OH2 station. Propagation may not be favoring for us to decode him. Remember, we're only decoding the station on the right when there's two stations listed. The box on the right here are stations that I'm working or have worked. So in this case, you see that we've made exchange of calls here, and it's set up so that when a station is calling me, when it sees my call sign in the report, the software turns that red so I notice it. So in this case, OE1 QW is giving me a signal report, and we're going back and forth until we finally complete our QSO here. Down at the bottom, we have a place to change the band, change the frequency, we can see what mode we're in. We can disable or enable the transmit cycles. We can stop the transmit. And down here, this little scale shows us how far along in the cycle we are. So this is FT4, so it's a 7.5 second cycle, and it says we're 5 seconds into it. So let's look at some of the other screens. The first thing we want to do when we start the program is set the mode. Choose which mode we want, so go up to the top menu and choose which mode we want to operate. The next thing we need to do is change the band. So we go down to this little drop-down menu, and from there we can click on the drop-down and pick the preset frequencies for each band. But if the station is a DX station and it's working outside those normal range of frequencies, we can actually simply highlight this section and type the frequency directly in there with our keyboard, and that'll change the frequency of the program. And if we have cat control, it will automatically change the frequency on our radio. There's 3 boxes on the software that I suggest everyone keep checked. These can be changed in special circumstances, but if you're just starting out, I find these very useful to have all 3 of these boxes checked. So they are hold transmit frequency. We want to keep our radio transmitting on the same frequency no matter who we're answering, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. We want auto sequence to be on. That way each of our reports is sent in the right order. And then we have to have the checkbox checked if we want to call CQ and have it automatically answer when someone responds to us. I mentioned earlier that we want to keep our transmit frequency on the same place. So the first thing I do every time I tune up is I go to my graph for WSJT-X and I find an empty spot. In other words, where there is no other station transmitting, I right click on that and set my frequency there. I will keep my frequency there as long as that frequency stays clear. No matter who I'm contacting, I don't need to jump around to contact them. They'll hear me as long as I'm within the passband. So again, another reason that you want to stay on one frequency and that you want to keep your filters set for their maximum on the radio, for maximum bandwidth. So let's look in more detail at the receive window. Here we see a gray line showing the band that we're on, and it's also saying we're starting a new cycle of decodes. So right here, this is in gray because I've worked DL8 before, but DL8 is actually sending a report of -1 to this JE1 station. Our next line down is a new zone for me, so it's showing up in a bright new color to alert me to that fact. And this E2 station, E20 station is calling CQ, and his grid is there, OK3. Let's drop down a little bit further, and you can see this station right here, CQ N4ELUE, again, his grid square. Down here, where we have this blue one, we can see that UA3, which is the station we're decoding, is sending a 73 to the F5 station. Now, if I wanted to work any of these stations, I could simply double click on the one I want and it would start transmitting. So if I double clicked on this W7 KKC, it would start calling him. But if I double click on this line, it would not call the Foxtrot 5 because I'm not receiving him. It would start calling the UA3 station. So it's very important to realize you can't work the stations on the left in the QSOs because you're not actually copying them. You're just seeing that another station is talking to them. Here's a sequence of me calling CQ. You can see I've been calling CQ for a while, and then a station answered me. W8SIC answered me, and the way he answers me is he sends my call sign, his call sign, and the grid square. I have auto sequencing turned on, so I immediately go down and send the next transmission, which would be his call sign, my call sign, and his signal strength. And the software automatically determines the signal strength for you. You don't need to read a dial anywhere. He then sent back a Roger, you're -10, and then I sent Roger, Roger 73. Now, what I cut off, unfortunately, is he then sent me a 73 afterward, and we completed our QSO. So this is a complete QSO between two stations. And here we're showing the activity in both boxes at the same time, and you will see the activity in both boxes. You'll see all the received activity over here and all the activity when you're working stations over here. There are some occasions where we use special modes of operation. These are for specific contests and or specific operating practices such as Fox and Hound. To do that, we need to go back into our settings menu, go to our advanced tab, choose the special operating activity, and then pick the one we want. Fox and Hound mode is a method used for rare DX or for DXpeditions where they separate, go on a special band, and they can actually respond to more than one station at a time. So that's why they call it Fox and Hound. They're the Fox, we're the Hound. Also things like VHF contest, WWDigi, which was 2 weeks ago. These are all special operating modes, and we can have special exchanges for those. After transmitting a few times, you can use a software called PSK Reporter. It's actually a website that people connect with online, and they send their signal reports. It's sort of like the reverse beacon network, but instead of hearing the stations and collecting the information, they actually get reports via UDP packet from all of the different stations that are operating. And you can see how strong your signal is, who's hearing you. It doesn't tell who you're working, but you can see 23 hours before this QSO, it was -15 dB. I'm sorry, 23 hours before I took the screenshot, I was -15 dBs in Hawaii. And if I'd highlight this on the actual live screen, it would show me details of that station. So here's the link for the full 120 plus slides with step-by-step guidance to setting up your software and clickable links throughout it. So I'll let you jot that down. Here's my contact information, and again, there's also that link to the 120 slideshows. My G-QRP number, you can see that I've been in the club for quite a while. I'm 1417, joined in the early 80s. And you can see my other hobby is being a trainman on a scenic railroad in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is right about 10 miles northwest of me. So what we can do now is I can start taking questions, and I will just leave this up for a few seconds longer, and then I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll actually bring up, I'll not just stop sharing my screen, I'll actually just bring up, let's do that right now, WSJT-X. So here's the program actually operating, and I'll leave it in the background here while we answer some questions.
Okay, Anthony, this is great. Some of the questions that have come in pertain to synchronization. One question asks about in the field, determining your time, and then also a request from Mark GONMY about a link for a GPS clock interface.
Okay, So what I do, the first time I operated in the field was 2 years ago at Field Day in Delaware, and a lot of people wanted to get Delaware. So after Field Day was done, my wife and I were staying in a cabin in a state park, and we had no internet access. So I found that my laptop after about 2 days would drift off of time enough that I'd start having problems. So we drive about 10 miles to McDonald's. I go through the drive-through, get a milkshake, and resync my clock with the Wi-Fi at the McDonald's. So that was a good way of doing it, but it required a trip. But it did reward me in a milkshake. Since then, I've purchased a small, I think it was like $15 GPS unit that plugs into my laptop and lets me receive GPS signals and then sync my time with that. So I'm using that now when I'm in the field. I don't get milkshakes out of the deal, but I do get synchronous time without having to drive to the out of the campground.
Okay, the FT8 screen that you were putting up, it's not appearing on the display here.
Yeah, make sure. Let me stop sharing and restart here again.
And
okay, do we have it now?
yeah, there you go.
Okay, very good.
Okay, that's it. Okay.
So let's take a quick look here real quick. So first of all, I go down to my graph here, and you'll notice that I'm basically receiving all these signals in this 2400 hertz cycle. Now I actually can do a full 4000 with this particular radio. I'm using an Elecraft K3S. So I can receive, now some radios will only get 1500 hertz or a different amount, so you have to depend on the radio. But what I want to do is I want to see where there's busy stations, and I want to move my transmit away from there. So I need to go through 2 cycles at least to see everyone, and this is FT4, so they'll only take about 15 seconds to go through 2 cycles. So you see all these places where we have stations. Well, that's where I don't want to be, so I'm going to pick a spot right here. I'm going to hold down my shift button, I'm going to click there, and I'm going to put my frequency there. Actually, I don't like that one. I'm going to pick another spot here. So that's where my transmit's going to be. My receive is currently set for here, but I'm receiving the whole set of frequencies here. If I would double click on a station, it would jump to that receive to prioritize that receiving area, but it still will continue to receive the whole thing. So I will let it go through one more cycle here, and I'll pick someone. Okay, we'll be really hopeful here and try and get the station, this HS2, which I probably won't get. But you notice now my green receive, or the U-shaped brackets are highlighting this station, and now it's showing up in my band activity. Even though I'm not made a contact with him yet, I'm calling him, so it'll highlight that right here in my right window as opposed to my left window, which will continue to show me all the stations that have activity. So we'll let this go while I go ahead and answer some more questions, and maybe the good karma of answering questions will allow me to connect to this guy. So go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you show the waterfall,
Yes.
which is, I believe, is another screen?
This is it right here. Are you not seeing it?
We're not seeing that.
Okay, let me figure out why we're not seeing that. We should be seeing it over top of it.
There you go. Okay.
Okay.
Well, it was just there for a second.
How about now?
It's at the very bottom off of the screen.
Okay, there we go. We'll move it up a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll move the waterfall back out of the way now, so we can see the activity on the screen. Okay.
One comment from Bob GM4CAQ about the settings VAC and it's not so much a setting, but virtual COM ports,
Yes.
which are useful for him for his Flex 1500 setup.
Yes, and I'm actually, because I want to be able to integrate all my operations in my shack computer, I'm using a software called WinSuite for K3, and it's by VA2FSQ, and he has a program for the Elecraft radios, the Yaesu radios, and the ICOM radios. And what it does is it allows you to set up multi-port sharing. So I'm using the same COM port on my radio to operate my WSJT-X, my logging software, my computer, my contesting software, which is N1MM, and a couple other pieces of software. So it's all using multi-ports of port sharing to be able to use that. And I'm using this program to control it all. So it's Win4K3 suite, and there's also an Icon product and a Yaesu product from the same person, VA2 FSQ. I see one question about field operation. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is I'm building one of those phaser radios, which I showed you a little earlier, and it's not that big, and I'm matching it with a Raspberry Pi. So basically, I'm going to have a very compact unit, but I'm doing a headless Raspberry Pi, so I don't have to worry about a monitor. And then I use a simple little Android tablet to control my Raspberry Pi when I'm in the field. So that's my display. So I can put everything in a small package and operate when I'm in the field very simply with that. Or I could even use my KX2. Again, the computer is the biggest part, so if you want to do something like a Raspberry Pi to control this with, it's a great way to go.
One of the comments too, I guess in addition to that, where you mentioned Raspberry Pi, is if someone has an older computer that's kind of power hungry, Raspberry Pi would be a good alternative to that. What's been your experience with the Raspberry Pi?
Well, I've had limited experience. As I said, I'm putting together that little project right now. But in the past, I've used it. And I know a number of people that are using it successfully. There's a whole group out there that just supports that Raspberry Pi activity. And I have on my website a link to some of those Raspberry Pi resources. My website, again, is let me bring up a browser page here real quick. K8ZT.com is the web page. And can you see that right now? Are you seeing the browser?
No.
Okay. Let me share again here. Okay. Are you seeing a browser now?
Yes, we're seeing a browser now.
So there's a whole section under operating on the digital mode. So this is where you're going to want to go first. It has a whole lot on FT8 and FT4. It also has some stuff on PSK and some other digital modes, but this whole section on FT8 and FT4. In addition, under the tech section here, I have a whole thing on Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. So I have a lot of resources on both Raspberry Pi and Arduinos and other microprocessors.
Okay, there's a question about, can you comment on split and fake it settings?
Yes. Let me talk about a couple things on that. The first thing is, let's go back to our band chart here again. I'm going to bring the waterfall up. Hopefully you can see the waterfall.
No, we still see the web page.
Okay, let me stop sharing and reshare again. I'm not sure why it's being so persnickety. Let's try that. How about now?
Yeah, now we see the waterfall in the FT8.
Okay, so the little thing about split operation. Let's say my radio, my transmit bandwidth is really limiting my power at 500 hertz. It wants a sweet spot of 1500. So by using those split capabilities, it'll actually shift the radio's frequency so that the tone frequency stays in an area where the radio will be putting out power. I have a friend who has an 891, and without doing anything, he found out that the radio was pretty much transmitting very well in this area, but anytime he would go up higher, because the tone was high enough, it wasn't transmitting effectively there. So depending on your radio, you may or may not need to use that split. I don't need to use it with my aircraft. It's just fine all the way across the band. Or you may need to make some adjustments on your radio as far as your transmit bandwidth. So for the most part, you can go with the fake it or the none and be just fine on that.
Okay, comment or actually, I'm not sure how he's phrased the comment, but let me see if I can rephrase it. This is Jim, M7ATF. Fair to say either FT8 or FT4 has more DX capability?
Well, when you look at those numbers, you remember we were talking about plus 10 for single sideband, minus maybe 15 at the most for CW, and minus 24 for FT8. So we're getting a huge increase in capability right there. You add into the fact that it has the redundancy built in, so pretty much every call sign I see here is going to be accurate. I don't have to worry about whether I'm mishearing a letter in CW or I'm mishearing a word in phone. So it does have the potential for working DX very much. Also, the fact that we're doing these just short little quick exchanges means if you're interested mainly in DXing or working new entities, you have a much better chance of doing them in a short period of time.
And from Michael Meadows, G4GUG, can you speak about band transmit products?
Okay, I'm
sorry, in-band transmit products. I
okay.
That.
No, I really can't. I don't know a lot about that. I think you might be talking about artifacts of the transmission on the radio. I don't really know about that. Sorry. I'm more of an operator, not a real technical person. Let's try calling this SP here.
Okay, while you're doing that, Myron, are you familiar with any attempts to use the Yaesu FT8 FT817 for FT4 and 8? That's actually a question. I asked the very same question to Joe Taylor. He had done a presentation for us at our club. And one of the things that he recommended was adding in a TXCO to stabilize the frequency. And you can add that on to FT818 or FT817. That is a recommendation for that. Doesn't mean you can't use it. It's just that there is some instability there from temperature. So consider that for adding that on to the 817, 818.
Yeah, no, I've used that whole series of Yaesu radios, and it uses the same interface to the 817, 818, 857, 897, 891. All use the same 6-pin interface on the back. So if you have any of those controllers that you want to use, external controllers, you can plug those and use those in any of the radios at the same without making a major change. Take a quick look here. The SP7 just responded to me, so I sent my call to him with my grid square, and he's responded on minus 24. So for all practical purposes, I'd have an extremely hard time hearing him with my ears, but yet we may complete this QSO. I'm saying he's +2 here. He's saying I'm minus 24. He might be running a kilowatt, and I'm running 5 watts. So I don't know that. He might be running a huge antenna. I don't know that. And unfortunately, he didn't answer me this time around, so we'll wait and see. Now, the nice thing is, because I'm not calling on his frequency and I'm not calling on top of someone else, unless someone comes and crawls on top of me, I'm not interfering with anyone. So even though I'm calling all these different times, I'm not interfering if he went off and called someone else. Now, I don't think he's going to respond to me, so I'm going to switch back over here to CW by clicking on this exchange at the bottom. So my next time around, I will transmit, instead of calling him, because he's off working this A25, I'm going to send my call sign and call a CQ again here and see if someone else answers me. You can see that I'm decoding a BI2 here pretty weakly. We're running into the end of the time period where I'm going to work these Asians this morning from the US. Band hasn't quite shifted to Europe yet, so we're in an in-between period of time here.
Question while you're doing that, would you notice a difference between power output, 5 watts versus 20 watts? You know, what is the ideal output power?
To tell you, I run all 5 watts here or less, 5 to 3 watts. I don't notice any difference between 3 and 5 watts. Totally negligible. I would not. So when I'm running my KX2, I run it at 3 watts because it's much more efficient at that power. When I'm in the shack running my K3S, I'm running it at 5 watts. I have friends who run, QRO radios, and I convince them to turn it down to 50 watts, and they grudgingly do that. And I say, well, let's try 20, and they grudgingly do that. And they come back and say, Anthony, I didn't notice any difference. And then they'll accidentally turn it to 5 watts, and they'll say, I didn't notice much difference. Or they'll start to notice some difference at 5 watts. I think between 20 and 50 watts, you're not going to notice much of a difference. Once you drop down below 10, as compared to 50 watts, you're going to start noticing a difference. So there is difference, but it's not that much. And as a bunch of QRPers out there, you know that quite often people have very unfavorable considerations of the amount of power we run. They don't think we can work anyone. And as you can see from that chart I showed you a little earlier, 214 DXCCs in 3 years with 5 watts isn't too bad.
Another question from Bob, KF5VLJ brings up an interesting point about the difference between single sideband versus the QRP guys double sideband. I don't know if you have any experience with
yeah, let me address that in 1 second here. I just want to show real quick. Hopefully you can see that something just popped up on the screen. Can you see this, Mark? It says, okay. So what happened is, if you look here, SQ3, I sent him a +3. He responded with a Roger, Roger, you're 0 here, which is great. And then I responded with a 73. He gave me a Roger, Roger 73. He gave me a 73. And up pops another screen which asked me to log the contact. So I'm going to click on that now. That goes into my log automatically. So now that's been logged and I'm ready to work to the next station. So that was just a quick QSO there. So one of the tricks with the double single sideband is if you have 2 radios that are both using double single sideband, it's very difficult for them to make a contact. So for all practical purposes with that particular kit, you're going to be limited to all the people that aren't using the kit as far as being able to connect with them easily. There's also the complaint by some people that you're putting out 2 signals when you only need to put out 1. But again, you're putting out a low power signal, and I don't think that's really that much of a problem. So it's a good way of experimenting for a very low cost. I don't know if you really get seriously into this, if that's the route you'd want to go. The phaser is probably a little better way if you want to build your own kit. But I think what you'll find out is with those single band kits, once you get involved with this and see what it can do, you might want to start operating on other bands. So you might want to consider the possibility of a radio that's multi-banded.
Okay. And for your particular situation, what antenna are you using?
Right now I'm on a 3-element beam, but I have a beam for 20 through 6. But as I said earlier, I'm using simple wires on the lower band. So like on 160, I'm using a 60-foot long sloper that comes down to 2 feet off the ground. So it's a really marginal antenna for 160. But I've worked all states, including Alaska and Hawaii, and I've got 76 countries on it. So it does it's a very good band. And right now during the summer, I haven't been operating as much 160, but during February and March, almost every night I was working in European on 160 at about 3 a.m. my time here, which would be about 7 UTC. So it was fun. It was a fun winter. I made sure I was available during that time frame in the morning, and to get a new country every night was a tremendous thrill, especially on 160.
Okay, Myron mentions your log is maintained in WSJT, or can you set the app to use an external logging software website as an add-on to that question? Also, some mention about Log of the World, and that there's some folk that are not in Log of the World. Can you comment on both?
Okay, so what happens is, we'll look at the log here real quick. This is where it puts the log by default. So we go here under set, I'm sorry, clicked on the wrong button. We'll try that one more time. Go here and we go to open the log directory, and it keeps an ADIF file here of my log. It's right here. But what also happens is this software has the ability to send UDP packets. So many of the logging programs now have the ability to import it automatically. So I'm using a program called Logic by PDA Software. But I know, for example, one of the free softwares out there that's very popular is Log4OM. It has the ability to suck in the contacts directly from the program. So what's happening is we're not using the WSJT-X to push the contacts in. We're actually pulling them in with the software. So those are your 2 options: to have software that are pull it in, or have software that can interpret the UDP packets that are being sent. So we just had a station work us here, another station. I'm going to show you real quick here in the settings. There's a little spot where it says reporting. And on the reporting, if you check the button down here that says enable PSK reporter spotting, that sends out a UDP packet automatically to both the reporting software, but also to other logging software that can interpret that UDP packet. So that's the information I'm using to go to my log, but it's also the information that's working with this other factor here. So let's take a look at that real quick. Let me log this station. So if I'm gonna bring up a browser here again. Hopefully this time you tell me if you're seeing the browser or not.
We're not seeing the browser.
Let me stop sharing and reshare again.
There you go.
Okay.
That's the browser.
So I'm going to go to a site called PSK Reporter. And this site basically pulls in those UDP packets from all these stations that are deciding to send their information. So I'm going to put my call sign in here. And I'm going to say I want to look for the last hour to see who's heard me. So these are the places in the world where my signal has been heard in the last hour. And I'm going to change one of the settings here. I'm going to tell it I want to see the signal noise ratio. There we go. And I'm going to tell it I want to hide the pink blob. Let's refresh the page. Okay, so you see this is where I'm at, approximately in this area where my mouse is at now. And these are all the stations that are hearing me and how powerful my signal is there. Let's go back and look at the last 24 hours. I haven't been operating a lot this weekend because I've been playing around with this wonderful online convention this week by the G-QRP Club. But you'll notice I did get on for a little while earlier, and there was 3 stations that heard me in VK and ZL land. I wasn't real strong there, but I was on 40 meters and they were hearing me. Here's a station in South Africa that heard me. And notice when I move my mouse over any of these, it pops up a window down at the bottom left showing details. So that's the J73 that was hearing me. The nice thing is we can also look at the other stations in the world and see what they're doing. So I have a friend who's across town. I can always check and see how busy Steve has been. By the way, Steve is one of those people that said, that FT8 stuff, it's a bunch of computer to computers talking. I'm not interested. It's not real radio. Until he tried it. And then he told me, Anthony, it's not really computers talking to each other. It's just like having a really good preamp that can really hear below the noise level. And here Steve has been very active. Steve has been on for 3 months now. He runs 20 watts typically, and he has worked over 2,400 contacts in 3 months. And he's worked EXCC, and he's been extremely happy. And this has been his activity so far today. And notice he was being heard a lot more down in the VKs and J8 and ZLs than I was.
Okay, a couple of questions. One is an antenna question. Anything to this mode and horizontally polarized antennas versus vertically polarized antennas?
Only for close-in work, VHF, UHF. If you're this, by the way, a lot of people don't realize that this is a great mode for 2 meters and 440. And it's been really popular here in the States for the VHF, UHF contest. And again, it's the same thing. If you're familiar with working VHF, UHF, you really want to be the same polarized signal. With the HF stuff, though, because I'm talking about multi-hop, I don't see any difference other than the same factors that you have when using any type of antenna, the takeoff angle and all those things. So everything is the same for this digital modes as it is for the non-digital modes.
Okay, and we're actually getting signal reports in chat and the Q&A on this signal, which is fun. Okay, question for you from Mark G4HGL. I had heard that one should only call CQ on either even or odd times depending on country. Could you clarify this for me, please?
Yes, that's a VHF UHF thing. That's in a 6 meter thing. It's mainly a 6 meter thing. It was popular for years that when people did any kind of weak signal activity on 6 meters, that the person calling from the east would call on the even part of the minute, and the person from the west would call on the odd. So a lot of people have kept that phenomena. I would suggest using both, or you're not going to hear everyone. Because here's the deal. Right now, because I'm transmitting on the odd, that means the box is not checked. I'm transmitting on the odd here. I will never hear anyone that's transmitting at the same time as me. So all these stations I'm copying are transmitting on the opposite cycle as I am. So you want to be able to switch back and forth. But that's where that convention of even odd comes from.
Okay. Here's a troubleshooting question from Tony, W8CDC. He only has FT8 experience, and when I try to continue calling a station like you have just done, after about a dozen calls, the software cancels the Enable TX, and in the bottom left corner, I get a message, runaway transmit. Could you
Yes, right
comment
here.
on that?
Right here in your settings, there is a button under General that says how long you want your transmit watchdog to be. I have mine set at 8 minutes, which is a little bit long. I think the default is 5 minutes. So it'll run out of time and stop transmitting. The other thing that'll stop you from transmitting is if you pick the exact spot on top of the other station and you're working in oh, I forget what special mode it is, it'll bounce you off because it won't let you transmit on top of the other station. And I forget exactly what does that, so I can't remember that off the top of my head. But right now I'm calling this R1TM, and he, see what I did is I called him before he finished transmitting. Because I'm not calling on his frequency, I don't need to wait until he calls CQ. I tail-ended him when he gave this 73 to this G8 UDP. So I could come over here and call on any of these stations that aren't calling CQ. Let me go through real quick here. The dB is how strong the signal is. The next line is the difference in time. As long as it's less than a second or so, this will be fine. If it's more than that, you'll start seeing it in red, which means it's not, it's outside the limit. So the R1 TM just answered me. I didn't touch anything, and because I have the auto sequencing set, it'll start replying to him. So it automatically sent back minus Roger -2. He sent me a -24. Again, these signals are very weak here as far as them hearing me, but I think I'm going to be able to complete this contact. Now, sometimes this will go on forever where we'll transmit back and forth and never finish up. Two things happen. One, propagation has gotten to the point where they're not able to hear me anymore, or someone has came and started transmitting on top of me. Now, unfortunately, I wouldn't see that because, again, I only see the stations that are transmitting in the opposite time. So someone could be in my time cycle and be transmitting on me. So what I'll do is if I keep getting back and forth with no response, I'll come down here and move my transmit frequency to another spot, hoping that that's going to be completely empty. So we'll do that real quick here and see if we have success with him. Now see, he started calling CQ again because he didn't hear me. So we'll see if he hears me on the second time around. But you'll also notice when I first started calling him, he was -1. He's now dropped to -3. So he's, you know, we might be losing propagation there. Also, my antenna's not aimed in the right direction, but we'll tweak that real quick. Okay, next question.
Okay. Did you mention audio levels on transmits so that there's no in-band spurious?
Yes. Let me talk briefly about that. It is very specific to the individual radio. You need to go to one of the sites I've listed for the radio settings. Some radios want you to set the ALC at 0. Some of them, like the Elecraft, want you to see some ALC bars on the display. So it depends on the particular radio, but follow the guidance of the particular manufacturers, people that use the particular manufacturer's radios to set your radio settings. The other thing I would strongly suggest is join the mailing list for WSJT-X and join the mailing list for your individual radio. So if you're a Yaesu FT991 user, join that mailing list, even though it's not specifically for digital, so that you can bounce those questions off of other users of the same radio. Because as I said, some radios want to be adjusted for 0 ALC, other, like the Elecraft, wants you adjusted for a couple bars of ALC. But you should never be overdriving your radio. That's one of the important things to not do. So you want to know for your particular radio what the suggested settings are.
When you say overdriving, just to clarify,
yes,
you're talking about the audio levels?
Yes, so it's basically like having mic compression too high, or you know, eating your microphone when you're talking on single sideband. Because remember, what you're really doing when you transmit is you're sending out pretty much similar to a voice signal, but you're sending your call sign with tones multiple times. So if you're overdriving it, you can run into the same sort of problems that you would with any type of single sideband operation. I'm going to switch my band here to 17 meters. And we'll let that run the background. Someone asked about a source for GPS unit. I simply went on Amazon and found one and ordered one. I can't remember exactly which one it was. Oh, someone asked about Logbook of the World. I didn't finish that part of the talk. Because people have to sign up for Logbook of the World, it's dependent on them whether they sign up or not. The same with any of these. So even though they might be using electronic logs, they don't realize that if they want to share that that QSOing information, they need to sign up for one of those services. And if you're not using electronic logs, I have a whole talk on my website. It's called QSOing in a Digital Age, and it talks about all the different electronic services for exchanging information for QSOing.
I have a question from Steve, who sent it to me privately rather than to the group. The failure to complete is the root of many of my not in log QSOs. Is there a way to stop that?
Yes. Well, one thing is you don't want to log a station until that log pops up. Okay, that little prompt to log. So it depends on the operator, but most people recognize a 73 as a completion of the contact. Some people want a Roger Roger, which was traditionally what was used. Remember, because these are such new modes, we're still using some of the operating conventions that were used for other modes. So a lot of these things have came down to us from the days of JT65, 1 minute VHF contacts. And the tradition was very similar to what they also did for Earth, Moon, Earth bounce, where you'd expect 3 R's or 2 R's to signify that the other person had completed the contact. So what the software does is when they see a 73 come back to you, it'll pop up the prompt to log the other station. So you don't want to log it before that time. But even with that aspect, that is depending on the other station using that same convention, and that they're not waiting for you to send some magical combination that you don't even know what it is. So that is still somewhat of an issue with people not knowing exactly when they've completed the contact.
Okay, a comment and a question. Comment, I thought that we should stick to 50 hertz frequency increments. I see on the listing here, they're all over the place. No one seems to bother, or is that an issue?
As far as the recommended frequencies or the operating, well, there's nothing that says we have to pick any kind of increment on here, and I don't think that's something you could ever enforce. People are always going to want to find the open spot and sneak into it. So I don't think you can really enforce that aspect of it. The thing that is going to become a problem is because these bands have become more popular, some days you'll come in here and you look at this bar graph and it'll be completely filled. The waterfall will be completely filled. So what do you do then when it's filled? Well, the suggestion is that you use alternative frequencies, and they've just added another set of alternative frequencies. But the other thing you can do is change bands, or the other thing I strongly recommend to people who are just getting started, don't ignore FT4. FT4 can be even more effective than FT8 in some cases. Let me log this station real quick here. The reason is, even though it has less sensitivity than FT8, because of the fact that it takes less time, if you're having signal fading, you might be able to complete the contact in that short period of time that you would not be able to complete even with the more sensitive FT8. So the idea of using FT4 more can help in the band crowding, and it means that you're making the contacts twice as fast.
Within the program, where's the setting for getting the country information to show up as it shows up in your comments?
Okay, one thing you've got to remember is I'm using a couple things here. Let's go up to the settings. It's under the general section is part of it, and then under reporting is the other spot where it has some information about it. But the main thing is I'm using one of the helper programs, and hopefully you can see this. And tell me if you cannot see. I'm going to move it up so you can see it a little better here. Oh, it's going to keep jumping to the bottom. This is JT Alert. I'm going to turn the linking off so it'll not dock. Okay, so I'm going to slide this up so you see it a little better.
Okay.
So hopefully you can see that JT Alert now right in the middle of the screen.
No.
Okay, let me stop sharing and reshare here again. Okay. Oh, we just worked another station. Let's log that. Okay. So hopefully you can see JT alert in the middle and it's all empty right now.
Yes, we see that.
So at the end of this next cycle, you'll see that this will all fill out. Now what this is doing is it's taking the information that it sees here and it's comparing it with the log in WSJT-X, and it's also pulling the information from the internet. So you're going to see that when I work someone, it's going to show me a lot more details down here. So if let's double click on someone here. We'll find someone, double click. We'll call this Scotty Station, even though he's not that strong. We'll see how that works. Let me get back my JT alert. Okay, so now that I've double clicked on this gentleman, you see that his name is Paul and he's in air and it tells me his grid square. It's pulling this information based on his call sign. It's pulling it from the internet from, in this case, QRZ.com. So this is JT Alert, and for those of you using Macintoshes or Linux, there's one called Alarm JT, which is very similar.
Okay, I think you may have answered this already, but I'll ask it again. Is there a link for checking the radio settings on your website? There's not a place for specific radio settings. I think you mentioned just.
Yeah, there is. There is on the website, and I don't know if this is going to show up on the page here or not. We'll see whether this shows up.
Yeah, and I'm not getting the page again. I'm still
Okay.
in the JT
Let me
alert.
pop this up here. Let me stop and restart again. Let me take the computer sound off. That might be what's causing the problem. Okay. So let's go ahead and share this page. And hopefully you're seeing my website again.
We're seeing the website.
Okay. So under operating, there's a section right here that says digital modes. Let's log this MM7 WAB. As I said, it's my multitasking mode. See, I can do a presentation, and I've worked 5 new stations here while we've been talking. So down here on the bottom left, these are all specific links for some of the different radios. And I don't have every radio listed here, but if you do some searches on the internet, also on YouTube, you'll find other radios. These just happen to be the radios that either I've set up myself or I've worked with someone else in setting up, or I've worked with solving these. Over the COVID situation, I spent a lot of time doing remote sessions with club members in my local clubs, helping them get set up by connecting to their computer and doing the computer work with them. So I wrote this one on K3S, and you notice it says JT65, JT9. It's still the same settings, but I had actually written this a couple years ago. By the way, if you're looking for probably the most inexpensive radio that has a built-in sound card currently available from the major manufacturers, if you want a full radio, is probably a lot of times the ICOM 7100 is on sale for very low prices, and it has built-in capability to do that, sound card built in. There are other radios also that have it, but that radio often is on sale for very inexpensive prices here in the US. Okay, so here's a case where I thought I logged the Scotty station, but he's still sending me a bunch of Roger. So I'm going to come back in here.
Well, your website is still showing.
Okay, I'm going to come back in here and send him this again. We'll get my website off there and show this other screen. Okay, hopefully you're seeing this, but he sent me a bunch of Rogers. He must not have got my last 73, so I sent it to him again. I'll send it to him one more time if I need to. So what I've done is that I've enabled the transmit, and if he sends a call to me, I won't send CQ. I'll respond to his call. Okay, and I sent 73, and he sent me a 73 back, so he's happy now. Now, really, he should have been logging me way up here once he got my first 73, but he did not. So I'm going to just make sure that he got me.
And what might that have been the case? I mean, his signal reports don't seem to be too bad.
He might have just missed one transmission for some reason. Someone might have transmitted on top of me, and and that's all I need. No matter how strong my signal is, if someone comes in and stomps on top of me, I won't necessarily know it, and that is the same as when you're working with any other QRP signal. Someone comes in with a big signal and plops right on top of you, and then no one's copying you. So even though you have a great signal 5 seconds ago, all of a sudden no one can hear you. So now right now, this station called me, and because I had the call first set with my CQ, it automatically sent back his signal report to him. So IU8 MOA called me, and I responded with a -9. He sent me his grid square again, which means he didn't get my signal report here. So I'm going to come down here to adjust this because I think someone might have come in and gotten on top of me here. Okay, so I've changed the frequency slightly. You can also change the transmit frequency right here by typing in a different frequency or by hitting the up and down arrows. So looking at the JT alert, which you may not see on the screen right now, it says his name is Vinciano, and he's in Marino del Napoli. So he's from where my grandparents are from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the OK because I just worked him. And we'll click on Enable CQ, so we'll continue calling CQ in the background. Other questions? I don't know how we're doing with time here. What time do we end?
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And we're pretty good on questions as well. If there are any other questions or comments, feel free. I think we've covered most of what we had on there.
I'm going to put up the main link here one last time. We'll bring that up. Let me bring it up here.
Yeah, we're still showing the program.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the talk we just did. Okay, so stop share. Yeah, usually when I share that monitor, I get everything. Okay, hopefully you're seeing the screen again.
It's cooking. There it is. Yes,
okay.
it's.
Let me go to the okay, there's where I want to end right here. So you have my contact information. Please feel free to email me. By the way, if your local radio club would like a talk, I do a lot of these talks for local radio clubs. I have 5 other different talks I do. So I'm available via Zoom to do talks for your local radio club. And then this is the link for the full 120 slide presentation with more details in it and clickable links. I'll put that in the chat also real quick here. You know what? I can't put it in the chat because I'm the...
Yeah, it's been in the chat quite often.
Good. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, actually, let's see here. Okay, by listening to this talk today, you're now required to make a FT8 or FT4 contact me within the next year, especially if you're rare DX. Oh, okay. Let me just mention one other thing. It's because you're only exchanging signal and strength and not much else. There's not a lot of reason to contact someone more than once on the same band. So that's why it shows up in grayed out. And the tradition is you don't contact other people unless it's a contest where you're getting more points for it. So that's why you typically don't work the same station over and over again. I guess if you had a friend and you wanted to, you could work every day. But for the most part, you only work once per band per mode. But that still means that you have 11 bands and 2 different modes that you could work on. So that's 22 contacts. And I have one gentleman in Ohio here. I don't know him personally, but we've ran into each other. I think we're now at 8 bands on one mode and 10 bands on the other mode. So thank you all for attending today. I hope you consider operating on FT8 and FT4. It's a great way to do QRP. And don't let it be the only way, though. I still am very active on all the other modes. I'm a firm believer in operating all modes possible. That means I have more chances of working DX.
Thank you, Anthony. And to close us out, a couple comments. Steve has mentioned that the club call G5LOW, if you look on the QRZ page, you'll see that the club is active on FT4. And I'm sure that there's a guidance within the club, in addition to Anthony, as far as getting on the air in that mode. Coming up in about 10 minutes, are the 2 streams, knowledge sharing streams. The next one on stream A is my homebrew bread bin experience with Nick, MONTV. And then on the stream B version It's My Shack on a Pole with Leslie, GO&MD. And note that those Zoom ID numbers are slightly different numbers than the meeting you're in on right now. But please do attend those. Thanks for joining us on this webinar, and we shall see you very soon on the next. Okay, we're going to close it out, and thanks.